The air in Washington, D.C. that night carried a different kind of pressure. Not the kind that came from news alerts or political chatter, but the kind that settled in the lungs, just heavy enough to make you pause before speaking. Inside the studio, the stage was set for a live international panel. At one end sat Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, hands clasped, expression firm, posture that of a man used to owning the room. He wore a deep navy suit, silver tie, and that practiced calm of someone who believed facts were negotiable, if said with enough confidence. Across from him, entering without announcement or entourage, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. No dramatic entrance, no crowd-pleasing wave, just quiet steps, a cobalt blue blazer, and a slim folder tucked under her arm. She didn't need anything else. Her presence alone reshaped the space. The moderator opened with the obvious. Prime Minister, in recent weeks, Israeli airstrikes have hit civilian infrastructure in Gaza, including hospitals and schools. Some are calling these actions war crimes. Your response? Netanyahu didn't blink. Iran is the real architect of this chaos. They fund Hamas, embolden Hezbollah, and threaten Israel's right to exist. We are defending our people, as any nation would. A few nods from the audience. Studio lights shifted slightly. The tension was building, but it wasn't the Prime Minister who held it. Jasmine reached for her mic. Slowly, deliberately. Mr. Netanyahu, she began, her voice low but cutting clear through the silence. I have one question. He looked at her now, directly. There are no missiles marked "Made in Tehran" on the roof of a school. The children hiding under desks don't know whose war this is, but you do. The words landed not like an attack, but like a truth too heavy to dodge. Netanyahu didn't respond. Jasmine leaned in, steady as ever. You keep saying defense. But defending what? If you destroy every classroom to stop a rocket, who teaches the next generation peace? A hush fell over the room. No shouting, no theatrics, just a question that made everyone watching sit a little straighter. Netanyahu's fingers tensed slightly. His eyes narrowed. He was calculating now, not how to answer, but whether there was an answer at all. Jasmine didn't need a reaction. She simply set down her mic, folded her hands, and looked forward. Because sometimes power doesn't come from what you say, it comes from what happens after you've spoken, and no one dares speak back. The silence after Jasmine spoke wasn't awkward. It was surgical. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the camera operators stopped moving, instinctively drawn into the tension now hanging in the air like smoke from something just detonated, but quietly. Netanyahu finally shifted, slowly. He adjusted his tie, then his posture. His face didn't crack, but something behind the eyes flickered, something that wasn't there a minute ago. Congresswoman Crockett, he began, voice steady but colder than before. You speak with passion, but passion cannot protect lives. Intelligence, precision, strength, those are what protect children. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't even blink. Netanyahu continued, now turning to the audience, building momentum like a practiced orator. Hamas hides weapons in schools. They launch attacks from playgrounds. Do you know what it's like to live with that threat every day? To be blamed for defending yourself? He expected applause, or at least sympathy. What he got was still silence. Because Jasmine was still watching him, not with rage, not with outrage, but with something far more dangerous, clarity. She reached again for the mic. No rush, no theatrics. Do you know what it's like to stand in the rubble of a school and hear the silence that follows a child's last breath? That was it. The line. The one no spin could cover. The one no audience could unhear. You say you're protecting your children, but my question was about theirs. Netanyahu's jaw clenched. It wasn't that he didn't have an answer. It's that he knew whatever he said next would sound like an excuse. The moderator stepped in, fumbling for neutrality. Let's move forward. Let's try to focus on diplomatic options. But the moment had already happened. People watching at home were frozen. Some leaned in, some paused, some stared at their screens not blinking. Because when someone finally says the one thing no one's supposed to say, you don't want to miss the way the room breaks around it. Jasmine leaned back now, calm, still. She didn't need to speak again because what she said would be replayed 1,000 times by midnight, not because it was loud, but because it was true. By the time the commercial break hit, the clip was already circulating. On Twitter, it was captioned, "She asked about the schools," and he had nothing. On TikTok, creators synced Jasmine's line, "You say you're protecting your children, but my question was about theirs," with slow motion effects and piano music. The views hit 500,000 in less than 2 hours. Cable news was scrambling. CNN called it a moment of moral reckoning. MSNBC labeled it the first time someone forced Netanyahu to flinch without raising their voice. Fox News, struggling, called Jasmine emotional, off-topic, and provocative. But even their anchor hesitated when they replayed the clip. The silence spoke louder than their panel. Backstage at the studio, Netanyahu was surrounded by aides. One leaned in. "We need to shift the narrative. Push Iran harder. Frame it as Hamas manipulation. Don't mention the schools." But Netanyahu didn't answer. He was scrolling through a tablet, watching the clip, rewinding it, watching again. That one question, it wasn't confrontational. It was worse. It was human, and he hadn't prepared for that. Meanwhile, Jasmine was in a private green room. She sat with a cup of tea, no phone in hand, no team strategizing, just quiet. Her chief of staff walked in. "You broke the internet." Jasmine looked up. "Did I break the truth?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because this wasn't a viral moment. It was a crack in the wall. People weren't just retweeting her. They were remembering that behind every statistic, behind every strategic strike, there's a backpack, a lunchbox, a little pair of shoes left in dust. The Israeli government released a formal statement by evening. The Prime Minister strongly condemns the emotional manipulation of sensitive security issues by foreign officials unaware of Israel's day-to-day threats. But it was too late. The public had seen something real, not rage, not politics, not partisanship. Just a woman asking why no one was talking about the kids, and the world, for once, had listened. The next morning, Israeli media hit hard. Headlines called Jasmine uninformed, naive, a pawn. Government spokespeople appeared across news networks denouncing her as an activist in a suit. But something was different this time. The usual echo chamber wasn't echoing back. In London, a BBC anchor asked bluntly, if her question was so offensive, why couldn't he answer it? At the UN, a soft buzz spread among diplomats. One envoy whispered to another, "She said what we've been thinking for years," out loud. Netanyahu, furious but collected, arranged an exclusive interview with a primetime American outlet. He wore the same navy suit. He was calm, methodical, rehearsed. "We will not be lectured about morality by someone who has never lived under rocket fire," he said, a practiced blend of indignation and gravitas. The anchor nodded. The segment was clean, controlled. But once it aired, the comments flooded in. Still no mention of the schools. Still no answer for the children. Meanwhile, Jasmine was invited to every network. She declined most. But when she did appear, once on a Sunday evening interview, she looked straight into the camera and said, "If being called emotional is the cost of caring about kids being buried under rubble, then yes, I'm emotional, I'm human, and I'm not sorry for that." It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, with no need to win the room, no shout, no slogan, just a tone that made it impossible to look away. And quietly, something began to shift. People who normally scrolled past Middle East coverage paused. People who usually didn't care about international law Googled it, and people who always thought the truth had to roar realized it could whisper. Netanyahu called a Security Council meeting the next day. Behind closed doors, one general leaned in and muttered, "We lost ground." Not militarily, morally. Netanyahu didn't respond, because he already knew. The war wasn't just on the ground anymore. It was in the minds of the people watching. And Jasmine hadn't just asked a question, she had planted a fracture. It started showing up in places no one expected. A handwritten sign taped to the wall of a middle school classroom in Chicago. What about their children? A college campus in Atlanta held a panel on civilian casualties in conflict zones. Jasmine's clip opened the discussion. In Congress, a junior senator from Oregon quoted her directly during a foreign aid hearing. It's not anti-Israel to ask why we're funding airstrikes on kindergartens. That statement was met with stunned silence in the chamber, just like on the debate stage. Back in Israel, the shift was subtle but sharp. A leaked memo showed that Netanyahu's war cabinet discussed new guidelines for press responses to civilian casualty reports. Tighter language, more blame on Iran. But internally, not everyone was convinced. An IDF spokesperson, speaking off record, admitted, the narrative's slipping. That Congresswoman didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She just asked a question. And somehow it echoed louder than a siren. Meanwhile, Jasmine? She was back in her district, walking through a local community center, talking to students about civic responsibility. No press, no podium. A young girl, no older than 9, tugged on her sleeve. Why did they get mad at you for asking about schools? Jasmine knelt down, looked her in the eye, and said, because sometimes, when you speak the truth, it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. The girl nodded, not confused, not scared, just understanding, in the quiet way kids do. That clip, captured by a local teacher, went viral too, not because of the lighting, not because of the production, but because in a world that had grown desensitized to noise, Jasmine had taught people how to hear silence again. And Netanyahu? He ordered a full PR blitz, interviews, op-eds, a speech at a major policy summit. But after every sentence, after every Iran-backed terrorism and every Israel's right to defend itself, came the same online reply. Okay, but what about the bombed schools? It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a haunting. For the first time in months, Netanyahu's approval ratings dropped, not in Israel, but in the US. A major poll revealed a stunning shift. 61% of American voters said civilian protection should factor into US foreign aid decisions. That statistic didn't come from policy speeches. It came from one woman, one stage, and one question. But while Netanyahu's grip weakened abroad, Jasmine's foundation at home started to tremble too. It began subtly. A scheduled interview on a centrist news show was suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. A defense PAC pulled funding from her next campaign, citing unstable messaging. An influential colleague cornered her after a vote on the House floor. You could have just said nothing. You realize that, right? Jasmine's reply was soft. And then no one would have said anything. The colleague didn't answer, but others did, behind her back. She overstepped. She's not foreign policy material. She made enemies we can't afford. Even in progressive circles, tension cracked the surface. She's brave. But was it strategic? Is she helping or just going viral? But Jasmine wasn't playing for approval. She was answering to something heavier than party lines. At a closed-door fundraiser, she addressed it directly. I didn't go to that stage to speak for a side. I went to speak for those who don't have one. And if that makes me hard to manage, so be it. The room was quiet, not uncomfortable, just convicted. That same week, a story broke. A former Israeli official, anonymous, ex-intelligence, told a European outlet, the Americans won't say it out loud, but Jasmine Crockett hurt our narrative more than 1,000 rockets ever could, and she didn't even raise her voice. In Tel Aviv, a university student held up a sign during a protest. Don't fear the truth, even if it comes from Texas. In Washington, a whisper began to circulate, that maybe Jasmine wasn't a fluke, maybe she was a shift. They called it a conversation on security and sovereignty, but everyone on the inside knew what it really was. A televised setup. 3 guests were booked, a former Israeli general, a right-leaning American analyst, and Jasmine Crockett. The goal? Isolate her, corner her, flood the air with facts and catch her in hesitation. Producers tried to keep it quiet, but word leaked. Someone from the studio texted her staff, "It's a hit job. Be ready." Her team offered to pull her. She didn't even look up. "Let them come, but I'm not raising my voice." The stage was framed with flags, maps, graphs. The general spoke first. "We neutralize threats where they hide. If terrorists use schools, those schools become legitimate targets." The analyst followed up, smirking. "Congresswoman Crockett seems more concerned about enemy civilians than American allies." Then it was her turn. She leaned into the mic, unshaken. "You keep saying they hide in schools, as if that justifies turning classrooms into graveyards. But tell me something, if you know where they hide, why do you always hit the kids instead?" Silence. The general blinked, unsure. The analyst tried to jump in. She cut him off with a raised palm, calm and unwavering. "No, really, if your intelligence is so precise, why are children still dying?" The moderator tried to pivot. "Congresswoman, surely you're not accusing—" "I'm not accusing," Jasmine said. "I'm witnessing, and I'm asking why no one else is." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even anger. It was surgical, the kind of truth that slices without blood. Social media exploded again. Clips flooded in with the caption, "She dismantled their strategy," with a question. By the end of the broadcast, the analyst avoided eye contact. The general looked tired. "And Jasmine?" She folded her notes, smiled politely, and walked out. One journalist whispered on the way out, "They brought her into a trap, but they forgot. She built her platform out of fire." Weeks passed, but the question stayed. It was whispered in think tanks, scrawled across posters at protests, typed in bold in the comments of government live streams. What about the bombed schools? Jasmine had returned to her seat in Congress. But something had shifted. When she stood now, the chamber got quieter. When she asked questions, people leaned in before she finished them. She hadn't gained power in the traditional sense. No new committee seat, no special title. But she had something rarer. Credibility. The kind that doesn't need a microphone. The kind that survives attack. Netanyahu, meanwhile, doubled down. He delivered a hardline speech to the UN. He invoked Iran 32 times. He never once mentioned the schools. That silence spoke louder than anything he said. In the US, a bipartisan amendment was quietly introduced. It tied a sliver of military aid to human rights transparency, especially around civilian targets. It didn't pass, but it was the first of its kind. One night, Jasmine was walking out of a late-night session when a janitor stopped her. "Ma'am," he said, eyes gentle, "my cousin teaches in a refugee school overseas. She saw your clip, said to tell you—" Someone finally said it out loud. Jasmine smiled. Not for the praise, but for the connection. That's all she ever wanted. Not to be viral, not to win, but to speak clearly enough that someone, somewhere, didn't feel insane for caring. A few months later, at a global summit on conflict and education, a young diplomat from Scandinavia opened his remarks with a now familiar phrase. "Before we talk strategy, I'd like to ask what Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett once asked. What about the bombed schools?" There was no applause, just silence, respectful, heavy, alive. And in that silence, her voice still echoed. Not because she shouted, but because she didn't need to. "I didn't come here to argue. I didn't come here to win applause. I came here to remind you that somewhere tonight, there's a classroom without a roof. And under that sky, there are children who didn't choose this war, but they're paying the price anyway. You can say Iran. You can say Hamas. You can say defense. But don't forget to say their names too. Don't forget the teachers who covered their students with their own bodies. Don't forget the mothers who ran toward the rubble. And if my voice makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why. Because I didn't shout. I just asked a question, one that still hasn't been answered.